Welcome to the Heroes of Reality podcast, a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Welcome, young adventurers. I have a special guest today, Adam Scorgie. He has an amazing film background, primarily growing up in BC. He was inspired and moved to New York City, where he spent almost 3 years studying film and television at the renowned Williams Esper Studios in Manhattan. Upon his return to Canada, Adam invested every dollar he had to produce his first featured documentary, The Union, the business behind getting high. The Union exceeded all expectations by being selected to 33 film festivals, where it won several Best Featured Documentary awards. The success of The Union demanded a follow-up, which led to the crowd-funded sequel, The Cultural High, which I actually backed. Upon requesting in 2012, the film, which focused on the war on drugs, would go on to screens for government officials in Canada's Parliament Hill during the country's preliminary steps to legalize marijuana nationwide. Adam was very fortunate to be a two-time guest on the Joe Rogan show to talk about the impact of both films. To date, Adam has produced 10 featured films, with 2 features currently in post-production, including Inmate Number 1, The Rise of Danny Trejo, and Bisping, an in-depth look at the life of UFC legend Michael Bisping. His leadership and loyalty to his team has ensured that his future films guaranteed to impress and inspires those who watch it. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Adam Scorgie.
Hey.
Well, thank you so much, brother. Thank you for being here.
Works.
I know. We're
pleasure.
able to connect through time and space. Yeah, of course, man. Where you at? I see you're highly mobile at the moment. Where you calling in from?
Well, I had to my wife's out of town right now with my oldest daughter, so the boys have private kickboxing lessons because they can't go to regular gyms right now. So I dropped them off and I'm working in the car. So that's what we have to do. We multitask and we just get it done, right? We figure it out. So that is where I'm calling from. Hey, and thank you very much for backing the Cultural, by the way. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was funny. I was reading through the bio. I was like, I remember backing that back in the day because it was so inspired by the Union. It was like, oh my God, people need to know about this. And when I saw that, I was like, have to, because you want to support people that make content that you love. And, it wasn't, back in the day, you had to find creative ways to make films happen. I mean, as you know, the cost of making films. So you've kind of gone along that path.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when I went on Joe's around that time when Culture High was coming, because I'd done research on, that's before crowdfunding became a term. And before, when you used to have to get on Kickstarter, you used to have to get invited. You couldn't just go and submit a project and see, like, it used to be like an invite of creative people to go on there. And I was trying to figure out a way to go on there, and I was messaging all the people. I'm like, hey, do you have an invite left? And they're like, no. So then this is the producer in me, or the creative hustler guys. I started figuring out, I started Googling. I'm like, well, who created Kickstarter then? And I found out the creators, and then I found out their emails. And then I personally emailed all of them and said, hey, look, here's what I've done. I'm trying to do something else in the creative space. I think this is a great, I've looked for a tool like this. You guys are ahead of the curve. And then, Andy Bao, I think is the guy's name. He created a whole bunch of, I think he worked on Amazon, some other things too. He was like, here you go, man, fire at her. So then, and now Kickstarter, now it's funny because for a while, the Culture High was I think it was in the top 5 for film and television projects that were funded in Kickstarter. Now it's probably not even in the top 100, but when it did at the time, to do $250,000 in 42 days was a big thing. And I had all these Kickstarter people saying, hey, we're about to launch it. And our crowdfunding consultant and our crowdfunding, I'm like, whoa. You've hired a crowdfunding consultant and then you're calling me to get free advice? If you're paying somebody, but none of that was there. I just used the internet. I just knew that we had a big enough following with the Union. My team and I knew we're like, if we tap into all these people, and this is when the internet was Wild West and was free. You would hit your target audience when you put stuff out there. You didn't have to pay for ads. You didn't have to, when we released the Culture High campaign video, it went for everybody in the marijuana community. Our executive producer, Bianca Barnhill, had worked with High Times for years, and she's the one that lined up Snoop Dogg's interview and Wiz and Be Real from Cypress Hill. And she was like, Adam, I can't open the internet without seeing something about the Culture Eye right now. You guys are everywhere in the cannabis space. Like, so it was really cool. We had an idea and we believed it. People thought we were nuts. They're like, you're gonna, because originally our goal was 190,000. People are like, you think you're gonna get $190,000 for this? And we're like, I was like, I think we're gonna overfund actually. So we did, and it hit the zeitgeist. And I timed it though, because when right when it starts exhausting people and it's out too much, I'd read some of the stuff of how the stats go. Right after 2 weeks, it'll start to tail off if you don't have. And that's when I timed it. Joe and I were talking about when I should come on. And I was like, hold up. Like, if he's like, what about this date? I'm like, that'd be perfect. If we launch on this day, that'll be 2 weeks. And by then it'll start to go down. And then it just went like this. And I remember people commenting, be like, I'd never even heard of Kickstarter or crowdfunding until Joe Rogan's podcast. And we talked about it. Right. And it just skyrocketed it to a whole new level.
It's one of those things that there was such a need for it and such a value, which what was incredible to me is, so I watched the Union last night to kind of prep for this, because it's been a little while since I watched it. I remember how it was, but as we go through it, and the Culture Eye it came after the Union, and what I thought was so incredible is everything that you talked about in the Union about this doesn't make sense. Why is this illegal? Think about look at this underground industry going on. Everything's happening. And so many things that you wanted to happen has kind of, in like the last 10 years, come true. Like the culture has adopted it. It's become mainstream. Governments taxed it. They've seen the value of it. You've seen all of the actual side effects. People aren't running crazy down the streets. It's actually benefiting society in a lot of ways. But that at the time, like, you had to secretly, go into like backroom bunkers to try to, put on those blackout glasses to go into, seedy places. And like today, I'm seeing my friends' farms that have, giant areas that are just open. So I have two questions on that. One, what was the genesis for the Union and starting that out? Like, because that was a very well constructed and beautiful thing. And the second piece of the genesis is, how does it feel to actually create that and actually be on a mission to say, this doesn't make sense, we should do something about it, and then 10 years later to actually have that mission more or less come true?
It's crazy. Well, the genesis of how it started was that, when I was going to film school in New York, and I'd come back, and this is really when docs were kind of hitting the mainstream, because digital was now a possibility to make documentaries, more possible to do, because back when you had to use film and you had they were so expensive, and to do them was just, unless they were a National Geographic documentary, something, they were tough. So you were seeing these in New York. I was seeing like Super Size Me and Bowling for Columbine, and like people going to the theater to see a documentary. Like when I grew up, you didn't go to the theater to see a documentary unless it was like an IMAX World National Geographic thing, right? So when I came back, I was looking for something to do in the film space, and then docs were hot, and I grew up around that culture in BC. So I was like, man, I can get access to these things. I can get us in there and look at it. And originally I thought I'd do it more of like a Super Size Me thing. I didn't think it would be this, this thing that would end up being this like worldwide cult classic that's now in like cannabis museums and stuff. They have things for the Union about how that could arguably be the one that changed the shift in the way people thought about cannabis culture, right? It really, and that's all a fluke. Like we obviously, like we made a great film that we knew we stuck, that was true, and we stayed honest, because none of us were activists. We were just filmmakers, right, that went into this eyes wide shut and had our world thrown upside down. And as you said, it's interesting when you watch the Union, because we talk about the media manipulating things, and you're kind of seeing that now with COVID, right, of how the media will bend it one way or the other, right, when really it's kind of down the middle with what's going on, right? But it's just, you see how when we talk about yellow journalism that was used back then, and how there was no way to fact check it, right? Like the guy that came on your evening news and said, this is this, you're like, man, that guy knows, he's on the news, right? Like, and even to go try to find studies, like you couldn't go to Google. You had to actually go to like, hey, where's my, let's go to the UCLA library. Let's see what kind of medical studies they have. Let's pull those from the archives. Like, who was doing that? Nobody.
Yeah.
So, and then now to see where the unions come, we're like, like, I mean, both the Union and the Culture were invited to Canada Parliament Hill by the Liberals, which now legalized it in 2018. Both films were used as the catalyst to change. And the way that happened, right? And this is what we talk about in the Culture, is it comes from the ground up, not the top down, right? Is that Liberals did. Is like they're great government for Canada. I'm saying that they knew this would be their shoe in.
Oh. Adam, we seem to have some technical difficulties for a hot beat there. I'm not too sure what's going on, but we got drop.
Are we back now live there?
Okay, for some reason, I don't know what if we went through a dark hole or whatever in that moment, but we lost you for a beat. One thing, the last one, I'll just take care of, and we'll stitch this thing together. But the last thing you're talking about was with the Parliament actually using your documentaries as an educational film and talking about going from the bottom up. And it's really interesting how you're talking about that. Is that you can never force. Well, you could, but you can never force people to make a change, but you can inspire them to want to shift their mindset and what they do. And that Parliament thing, instead of saying you have to do this, instead of, as we might do in the U.S., storm our Capitol and knock down the place, right? You actually said, hey, does this make sense? Why does this make sense? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So what do you want to do about it? This is going to happen. This isn't going away. It's ineffective. It doesn't make sense. And everyone goes, yes. It's like you shine a light on the biggest elephant in the room of this issue, right? And now it's almost like a non-issue, where I was watching it with my fiance last night, and she's like, she's watching, like, yeah, duh, of course he's the issue. I'm like, but 10 years ago it wasn't that.
That is so cool to say that, because when it came out, a lot of people were like, man, you guys are pretty conspiratorial here. Like, it causes this, it killed. Like, and now when you're saying to see the culture shift that much in 10 years, where the first 40 would have been, no one thought, like, even at the end of the Union, most people said they didn't think it would become legal in their lifetime. That was like most people's answer, right? And now Canada, the biggest country in the G7 that has fully legalized it federally, has shown that the world doesn't fall, right? Like, Canada here, it's operating just like liquor. They tax it. They're having little to no problems. Sure, maybe there's some, driving while under the influence situations, no different than alcohol, but that's things that they have to combat anyway, and we have laws in place to do those. But that's so interesting to hear you say that, because when we were first releasing, a lot of people were like, oh man, that's so conspiratorial. And when you go back and watch it now, you're like, well, yeah, you tax it, you regulate it, you control it. You can it doesn't seem, I know, but when I got cut off before, but was interesting is that the reason why Parliament Hill brought it there is because they'd received thousands and thousands of emails and letters referencing it. So they said, we have to bring these guys in. And let's not get it twisted. They didn't do it out of the greatness of their hearts just to bring us in. They brought it in because they're like, wow, this might be how we get the younger voters to get us in, right? And I would bet in Canada that is the sole reason Justin Trudeau and the Liberals won, because everybody now, Liberals or Conservatives, we all seem to not like the current government. I would argue that's the only good thing they've done, right? But that was their platform, is that we are going to legal. And you could hear, like, and you could see culture, how the internet and stuff does it, but it takes years. Justin would say in interviews, he'd say all the things that the union and the culture I talked about, saying like, actually, if you want to protect children, the way to do that is to regulate it and control it and take it out of the hands of, like, all the things that we had these great professionals that we interviewed for the films talk about.
Yeah.
But in debates years before that, nobody ever said that. Children were the scare story to get you not to legalize it, right? What about the children? You want kids on the street smoking marijuana? We're like, no, that's what they're doing right now. In fact, like, most people, when they tried to get marijuana before it was legal, they'd usually go to high schools and ask their kids, be like, hey, do you know anyone that sells weed? Because I'm an adult now, I know where to get it anymore, right? The very place we're trying to protect is where people would go to get it.
100%. And also the thing that you're scared to is, by creating a black market, you are creating the gateway to other things that they wouldn't
100%.
normally expose themselves to it, because you have this association, and also you have that push away that they're telling me that pot's bad, and I know pot's not bad, so they're also telling me heroin's not bad. So the guy who's selling the boat, so you have this weird thing by trying to protect, you actually endanger more, and
that I just know from, I grew up around guys that sold drugs, and they don't want to keep you on marijuana, like keep you, but I say marijuana's the profit margins when you're the guy selling nickel and dime bags, you don't make money there. Where they make money is the coke and the pills and the stuff that can kill you on one bad dose, because the profit margins, because they crush the coke, they powder it down, they mix shit in there. That's where they make the money. Plus, if you're doing coke, only lasts for 30 minutes. You can come back, like some customers come back 6 to 10 times a night, right? I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more. You buy an eighth of weed, a lot of people are like, I'm good for like a month, right? I'm going to blaze a little bit here, blaze a little bit there. You're not a great client. So, and that was interesting, because that what you talk about, that was coming from law enforcement, ex-law enforcement. Like, we saw firsthand fighting it, how it did far more damage than it ever did. And he's like, and then the very people you want to take, people are like, well, we need to stop big drug dealers. Of course. But those guys can defend themselves in court. The only ones that are actually serving time for minor possession or dealing are the low-level guys, right? Primarily minorities, because they don't have the economic or social, background to fight themselves in court. So it's, another minority in an impoverished neighborhood that's trying to make some money to feed his family or her family, gets busted, they can't get out, boom, then they're done. They got a criminal record, and this is where even the conservatives jumped on, because you're like, well, they should be punished. Just like, okay, but now we're paying for them to be in prison. So a non-violent offender, you really want to pay for them for the next 5 to 10 years? I personally rather have them come back into society and work and earn taxes and contribute to the community. But when you just send them to prison, then they're not doing they're making money for the private prisons, but they're not making money. They're not supporting or helping their community at all.
And that was one of the things you find out, is the private prisons and how many got built, and there's basically who's influencing what, and what's the motives here. Are we really doing this to heal people or protect people, or is this a profit-driven decision that's allowing you to actually really turn this type of suffering into money alchemy and create a profit for the wrong people? So one thing that was amazing, and what you're looking at this is all this data was out there in different ways, shapes, and forms. And you went out and you harvested it. You actually took this raw ore of material and you refined it into something that was so dense with a well-constructed data and arguments and facts and things like that, it became pretty much undeniable and spread. And there's a reason why it spread and why so many people quoted it. What I'm really curious about in terms of structuring the story, in terms of uncovering the data, what did that process look like for you? How are you able to lay that out in such a well-constructed way that people were able to cite it to where it became easily accessible, common knowledge today? Like, how did you make that happen?
That I'd have to put all that in director Brett Harvey's wheelhouse, man. He was the magician that, we had little to no money at that time.
Yeah.
We were like, when we travel on the road, all three of us would stay in the same hotel bed. I'd stay in a little cot. Like, the one thing is the internet had just kind of was trying to be used then. It was really, when we were filming, early stages of social media really came out after.
Yeah.
So we were at least able to, when you found somebody that was like, had the credentials, we could at least usually go on YouTube and find some clips to see if they were charismatic, if they could, because sometimes you get a great doctor or botanist or someone, but they're so just like where if you interview them, we're like, man, no one's going to And that's just really the magic that Brett did, is he really put this thing together in an entertaining way that it never bored you. It always kept you interested. You know, there's just enough talking heads, and the old clips, which worked. We're like using these old black and white clips that were just funny. That's because that's all we could afford. We had clips and stuff, right? So that was all stuff from like the 30s.
Too real.
Fair use but it worked. That's what even some of the really accredited movie reviewers that would review our film were like, man, it worked. Like what they used worked, making these. And Brett scoured hours looking for like a goofy clip of a guy drinking in black and white to be like, what could it be? What could, like, to show people like the examples of what could we compare it to. And it was really, I put a lot of, like, of course, like we worked it took 4 years from concept to delivery. We originally we originally thought we were going to be done in like 6 months. Like that just didn't happen because we kept learning about clearances and other people and how to get rights and all these things that you had to learn. We made all the mistakes in our first film. And that's why, despite it being this international cult classic, it didn't make money, right? It built our careers, but it didn't make money, especially because it was a time where we didn't even get a distribution deal for like 2 years, but the film festivals had ripped it off and it was online. Like we're getting hundreds of emails being like, I watched this on my dorm. It was amazing. And I'm like, how are you guys all watching this? It's not even out yet. Right. Like, so it leaked everywhere. And I didn't understand why all the dorms were reaching out to us until I went to the first dorm. And this is before smartphones. Right. And I didn't go to college. So I was like, man, why are all these dorms hitting us up? And it's because they would have like one, community TV, and then everybody be on their computers on the internet, right? So everybody would find it on Pirate Bay and they'd watch it and then send it to their friends and go from there. And all these schools kept asking us. We have never had anything like it with our other films. Like obviously our other films were getting better as far as filmmakers and everything goes. Yeah. So so we've now getting big distribution deals and everything, but at the time, like that's the only one that really found its own grassroots thing. Just carried in a way that was like the union. It really was that it just kind of hit social media. Right, Facebook was launching and everybody was interested in Facebook. Kind of hit the zeitgeist in this crazy way.
Well, you hit on something that's really interesting. I mean, if you ever heard the term called the Dharma, it's like from the Bhagavad Gita. It's like what is it you love to do with what is the needs of the time, and that matches up together to make like your purpose, your meaning, what's going on. And really the needs of the time there's this huge influx of us all getting connected, and understand that there's this big elephant in the room that no one has been able to articulately call out that wasn't discreditable, right? For the most part, most people could discredit, even if someone comes on with a smart clip for 2 minutes, right? It's like, oh yeah, but he's a pothead. She's this, right? Yep. Label, identity, label, dismissal. But you construct it, and especially not being, smoking weed, pot smokers, Tommy Chong, trying to like pretend or like have an identity associated with it. There was so much data back to back to back. It became unrefutable as an information.
And so you nailed it. Like that was a conscious decision by our team too, as we said, hey guys, if we want to be respected as filmmakers, at that time, like you couldn't come out. Like that's why I was so lucky to get Joe Rogan. He was about one of the only celebrities that wasn't just known as like a Tommy Chong, that wasn't an activist, that was willing to come on camera to talk about it. Because back then, nobody wanted to go on camera and say that they openly admitted smoking marijuana, especially how taboo, and you'd lose sponsors and all that stuff back then. Joe was probably the only guy. Right. Mm-hmm. And that was out of a friend of our, Todd McCormick, who's also in the film, said, Joe, you should really do it. These guys are asking the right questions. They're doing it properly. And no one knew Joe would become the global phenomenon he is now. But you could see elements of it in the union and what he articulates so well, right? In a matter-of-fact way, but still funny, with explosiveness and charisma that I remember, like you would see it in the theaters. We'd watch it with sellout screens and you'd be like, and cue the laughs with Joe, and 1, 2, 3, right? When he talks about nerf the world and this and that. And it was like, then the memes and the shirts and that, it really hit the right way, because you would get dismissed like that, but nobody could dismiss us like that. They couldn't be like, these guys are a bunch of hippies. We're like, no. We deliberately, and trust me, we had a lot of opportunities. We wanted to smoke with some of our clients, right? But we were always like, we can't. We have to remain unbiased in this. We have to just show people. I mean, thankfully by the end we did. Like Dr. Lester Grinspoon, who just passed away last year, rest in peace. But when we did the culture high, and he's like, "Hey guys, you guys never smoked. Like, I'm the first Ivy League doctor. I was a witness for John Lennon," and we're like, "Yes, we will take you up on that now because we don't have to be as, careful with that, right?"
Yeah.
But that was the way to dismiss and do that, and became the film that allowed. We received thousands of emails of people saying your film got my parents to apologize to me because they then understood, right? They're like,
That's so
they're like,
powerful.
sorry, here we are drinking our face off and smoking cigarettes, but we would point the finger at you as like, you're an evil pothead, right? So it was really it really was the culture shift. And then that's why we called the next one the culture high, right? Because it kind of went a little deeper into the politics and the internet and the swaying of how that all happened. So it's crazy to reflect on it right now. You're bringing back, it's interesting to see. Like if you would have told me that the film, I remember people when it first came out, people were like, dude, this film's going to get marijuana legalized. And I was like, I don't think so. And hey, I don't know what percentage it did, but it certainly helped. The liberals screened both films, and 2 years later, they made it federally legal in Canada, the first large country in the G7 to make it federally legal.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Looking at how powerful it is, I can't point to another thing. Second of the whole Joe Rogan and his platform he stood on, I can't think of anything else that is more profound. That's got more emotional impact, more story, more definitive. Like where you construct a story that becomes irrefutable. That you look at it and it shifts the culture. And one of the things is, a lot of people that I talk to on this podcast and stuff, they're on a mission. They want to do something. They want to change the world. And with your documentary, that you actually went, and either way, you actually were able to make that kind of change. And so, and to me, I'm curious about, and you've shifted into some other areas, like like that the feeling of like you constructed something that actually had a global change on that. Are you looking to try to do another thing like that? I've seen the Inmate #1, and it's not the same thing. It's still a beautiful, heroic story, and we can dive more into that later. But is there another cultural shift you're trying to make, or is that it just so happened to line up and you weren't really intending for a cultural shift?
Yeah, man, it just really lined up because I don't know, and that's what people have asked, like, hey, how come you haven't done in our business? We kind of call it a call to arms documentary, right? Like, why haven't you done another one? And I'm like, well, that was just one that we connected with, and that was because I grew up in a town where that's what, like, you either had family that had some kind of family business. They grew up in Kelowna, BC, Canada, small town. There's not a lot of industry jobs, mainly tourism jobs. That you either had old money, like an old law firm or insurance company or property, or, a lot of the young guys, like they grew cannabis and like they had the Harleys and the building. It was just so entrenched in our culture that I was so connected to it that I was like, well, man, I could do something on that. It'd have to, I'm not saying I never would. I'd have to find something that I was equally as passionate about. And again, like I wasn't an activist or anything. Just as we stumbled into this, originally it was meant to be just something cool, like Super Size Me. And then we kept finding like, we're like, what? Nobody's actually ever died from cannabis directly? We're like, no, that's got to be wrong. That's a hippie saying. And then you'd look and you'd be like, well, no, like driving under the influence, but no, like I smoked weed and my heart exploded. And we're like, and I was always brought up to think like people are dying all the time, right? Like all these things where it was like, what? And then as you got in and then you learned the history and you followed the business and you're like, whoa. And then like, and you hear this a lot now when people go back and watch the union and then they look at current politics and everything today, and they're like, I remember people saying, I didn't just learn about cannabis, Adam. I really learned about human nature and our culture and how if we can be duped so much on something that's so obvious, what are other things that we're not even looking into, right? And that was the one that, and the interesting thing when you reflect on it now is I remember even people that would be hugely against it would then, like, there would be arguments, like I said, it was so well put together by Brett that they'd be like, well, I don't agree with it legalized, but yeah, like the fact that like, molesters and violent offenders are getting lesser sentences than drug offenders. Like you'd always have one part of the argument that people would be like, well, I didn't know that. And that's crazy. And I didn't know that. And that's like, there might be elements that they really got them to start thinking. And that's what a great documentary does, right? Even if you don't agree, if it makes you think, and if it makes you start going afterwards being like, well, they've got to be lying. I want to prove that wrong. Great. Because now you're diving in and looking and you'd be like, man, they were right about that. They were right about that too, right? They start digging in and doing their own research and going into it.
And that was the beauty of it. It wasn't I'm an activist, I'm right, you're wrong, you're so dumb. It was a process of discovery that you led us along a journey of uncovering and discovering the actual myths that are around this whole taboo subject that were like, really? And then what? Really? And you could see this grand evolution of just like the idiocracy of like this whole culture thing, and like and how something weird that can happen 70, 80 years ago, it still lingers through our culture. And even though it doesn't serve us, it's just like this, it's like, like a pancreas or something that we evolved with, but it serves no purpose. And like, why do we even have that anymore? So it was incredible to see.
You nailed it. And that's where I don't know, like if we had another thing like that where we could go into it and discover, that's what made the union so special, right? Even now, when we're talking almost 2 decades later, that it's still a really powerful film, is because we went in eyes wide shut. We didn't know. We didn't have our conclusion. And I remember people didn't like our ending. We had other filmmakers saying, you can't say the only thing that makes sense is none of this makes any sense. And we have more questions. You have to take a stance. And we argued and we're like, no, we are not going to take a stance. That's what we don't like about other films, saying that we need to do this or you need to do this. You don't need to do anything. You came on a ride with us. We went on the same ride you did as filmmakers. We'd go through and be like, what? We'd interview this Harvard doctor and be like, what? We do all this and be like, what? I didn't know that. And like you said, it kept building even for us. And it's cool that you took that from it and captured that, because that's what it was. Like, as we kept going through it, it just kept being like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And we shared that on screen. I think that's why the union will probably always be talked. Probably no matter how many films I do, it'll be like, that will be the one where it's like, Adam and Brett Harvey and their team, like that is their definitive, like almost Hall of Fame film that got them in recognition.
It's like a hit song from a band, right? Like you'll love the other songs, but you want to go back and see that hit because it has an emotional impact. And also like in terms of relatability, and feeling that suppression. And there's a lot of like weird cultural shame and guilt and like you're bad, you're a lazy, whatever, all the societal things that get placed upon it that you're trying to shake loose for no reason, right? And so I just felt like there's a deep emotional connection to it. But you made something that we love, and your other documentaries are great. And so like, I mean, the latest one that I watched, and it's you can feel a similar style, but you can tell you've evolved as people that create and produce these films and these documentaries, and it still had a crazy story, comes full circle. It still had this like rising up, especially for Latino people that may not have a way, and you paint the path. So I think it still have an impact, but especially on that culture versus like the global culture of people that imbibe in marijuana or have some sort of connection in the industry, the union. But you've been able to evolve a long time. So yes, people are going to unfortunately, yes, you made a big hit and people are going to reference it forever. And you're like, but I made this new one. They're like, yes. And that other one was awesome. So you're like, but I want to play my new hits. Be like, okay, great. Can we talk about the old hits too?
And we will never get tired of doing it. Like, I appreciate it. It's actually nice to go down memory lane with you and really kind of think about, because, we all struggle. We were so broke putting that together, and like, and I always talk about it this way, like my daughter wasn't even thought of when we started that film, and she was 2.5 when it was done. Right. So it was a process. Right. And we were broke, and people thought I was crazy, including my stepdad, who put a whole bunch of money in. He was kind of like, well, Adam, this is going to be your inheritance. Right. Like, cause I had already spent my money. Like, I think in total we spent like $350,000 with no guarantees we're going to make any money back. Right. Like, it was just like, this could get nothing. Thankfully, we finally did get a distribution deal, and it was able to pay back like 80% of my dad's loan, and the rest he kind of forgave. He's like, Adam, that was cheaper than college. You never went to college, so let's call that your film college fund. I'm like, perfect, right? Like it ended up being. So I'm proud of it. I love going and reflecting through and thinking about everything we went through, because it really prepared us now. Like, after everything we went through with that one, like having a film that made a global impact, became a cult classic, went way over budget. We originally budgeted $150,000. It was $200,000 more than that. People thinking we were crazy. I was working 3 jobs and still trying to do that. And everybody's like, Adam, give the film thing up. You need to just, and like, they didn't get to see it for like 2.5, 3 years. People are like, what is this thing you keep spending all this money on? We can't even see it. Like, this is crazy. Like, you're nuts. You're putting all this money. Like a lot of people thought we were crazy. Like, my wife and my family were the only ones that kept supporting me. But a lot of people around me were probably like, man, he needs to just get a real job, get on with life. You can't keep doing this, right? And now people are kind of like, oh man, like I've followed you forever, right? Like you totally got
yeah, you have no idea what I went through to get there.
Oh man, like trust me, me and my wife probably almost split up at the time, because we just had my daughter. I remember having like negative $400 in my account. My daughter's a month old. I'm broke. Yeah. I'm looking at myself like, man, I envision myself to have like, be successful and have money in the account when my first child was born. I'm so broke. I'm working 3 jobs. All my spare money and time goes into this thing that I have no idea if it's ever even gonna get released or do anything. Like, there's lots of times where you start to second guess yourself and think you're crazy, right? And think that you're on the wrong path. So I understand when people are creating, but and it's tough, because it could have gone the other way. It could have gone the other way, where this maybe didn't get released, and maybe a few people saw it at festival and it never, and then I spent all this money and I like bankrupted my family and looked like a crazy person. It could have gone that way. Yeah. Thankfully, I'd like to think that that's where my skills came in as a producer and a creative hustler, that like losing, like in the Eminem song, when he's like, failure was not an option. Like I lost years of my life thinking like, my poor dad believed in me. I looked in his hand, I shook his hand, looked at his eyes, shook his hand, said, I'm going to pay you back every dollar. And we got close, right? To where he could live with the little bit. He's like, hey, Adam, like I was expecting to get none of it back. And the fact that you got like, it took you 7 years, but hey, you got it back, right? Like,
yeah. Well, that's beautiful. How have you leveraged that? Like, so there's a feeling like, I mean, it's where there's something about this creative process where it's almost like you're going into a tunnel, right? And then you lose the light, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this tunnel. If there's a light at the end of this tunnel, and then you're able to pull through on this. How have you leveraged that? Is there internal feelings that you've had with other documentaries, other sensations, or things like that, to be able to use the pit that you went through on this experience, and to be able to find other moments with other documentaries where you could cling to that old experience and leverage that into other areas? Do you have any situations like that where you've been able to, like,
yes,
no?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like that. When if you come from a rough upbringing and then are able to have success, when you get older, you're able to reflect and be like, thank you that I had those to give me the tools to overcome adversity and challenges, to be able to handle anything that comes in my way now. And as parents, we're having a problem with this with our kids, where society's a little bit easier, I'd say, overall around, right? Where we helicopter our kids too much. Then they don't have adversity. And like by the time they're 20, they don't even know how to run a bank account because their phone's been paid for and everything's been like, we want to do so much for our kids and offer them a better life, that in doing so, part of making them a good person and able to overcome things is that struggle, that inner turmoil, overcoming things. But of course, we don't want to put too much on our kids. So I would say that's what kind of happened with the film. I look back now and I'm like, thank God, because after doing that, after boring all that money, doing it on marijuana, your first film in the documentary space at a time when like documentaries, like it's insane. If I look back at it now, like not knowing the end result, I'd be like, whoa, like at my age now, don't do it, man. That's crazy. Like you're going to lose your shirt, right? And I think back about all the people that gave me opportunities, like my sales agent, these people believed and they saw some kind of passion at the table, right? And obviously it always has to be educated passion. Like there's a lot of people that have passion, and I'll always take open calls from filmmakers and stuff when they do this. And that's the first thing I always direct them is I was like, hey, you've got great passion. I love, but you need to harness this into a business plan. Because even back then we didn't do it right. That's what got my dad and other people's like, we didn't even know what it was at the time, but we put together a proposal that looked like a pitch deck to look what we were making. We had a website when that was a big thing for a doc. A lot of doc, like now that seems, I don't seem so seriously be like a website. And we were on Facebook right away. We were on MySpace for those
ahead of your time, man.
That is, right? Like we were on all those things, right? early on so that we could show people something. So it wasn't just this crazy idea. We could harness it. We could put it in front of business people and say, here's what we're doing. Here's all the people following. Here's the track record. Here's the audience. Here's these things, right? Things that we could put in a tangible way. So it really prepared us now. Like now I've just learned with every film, there's going to be a challenge. Like whether you're dealing with talent and their agent and managers are a pain, or if the talent themselves has a big ego, or if there's financial hurdles, or if you have overages, the union and all the struggles really prepared me now. Like some people are just like, we came from this last shoot. We were shooting with we partnered with the Rocks company, $7. Crazy,
nice.
Right? Like my kids are like, what? So we partnered with them on our newest one. About bodybuilder Phil Heath, because he's a client of theirs.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, we traveled through, we're traveling during COVID, which made everything more difficult. We had flights canceled. We had to drive all over the country. And then driving, there was a huge accident on the highway. We're stuck on the highway for 21 hours. We didn't move for 10. And we had to get to Ronnie Coleman to interview him. And then we had a false positive of our director when we were interviewing Kai Green and Steve Weinberger. And we had to do it via Zoom. And everybody was like, Adam, they're like, we've had some of the other producers when you're not able to come and you were just so calm. And I was like, dude, I've been through everything now, where it's just like, oh, these are the problems and challenges of today. And this is this project's challenges. And tomorrow there'll be, and then one of our guys got held by the Great Wall of Canada when he came back. They let 3 of us get exemptions. They put our other guy in the quarantine jails. Like they put, like, they're just, every day was just like, everybody's like, Adam, how do you, I'm like, man, I've been through so much from the union being so broke where like I'd be embarrassed. Like people invite me out to speak and I couldn't even afford to like eat. I'd kind of be like, oh, I'll just eat later. Like I didn't even have like $20. I was waiting for them to pay me my appearance fee just to be able to speak. And like, I'd be like, oh, can you pay for my flight on like to get there? Like so broke to where, now it's like, oh, I'm like, oh, we're over by 80,000. I'll find it. I'll figure it out, right? Like I'll talk to our investors. Like just nothing now. Like, of course, I'd be lying if I say it doesn't still cause stress.
Yeah.
But I know that if I tackle it, I can overcome it now. Like I know that it is just another hurdle that's in the way. And like anything in life, if you want to really be successful, whatever it is, make films, be a lawyer, be a doctor, there is going to be hurdles. You're going to have family issues, health issues, financial issues. Those just come. That's just part of everything, right? And
that's such a sign. It's such a sign of a person on a path, right? So if you look at the hero's journey, and you look at like the Threshold Guardians. I mean, you've had so many Threshold Guardians as you're trying to make this film that you've gone through that loop. That you look back at that and you're making another loop, right? You pick another documentary and you're like, oh, these things are nothing. Like you're talking about, messaging the CEO or the creator of Kickstarter, doing this, like that is straight. Nothing's gonna stop me. I'm on a mission, and there's nothing that's really what it sounds like. There is like a disattachment from like this ego kind of like, I can't do this and this is too hard and I'm going to fail. There's nothing about that because you have this, from the feeling I'm getting is a deep-seated belief that yes, this does suck, but I'll figure it out. And that embracing it removes the suffering part of the sucking.
Well, that's why I put in my, if you saw my signature, I put creative hustler. Somebody called me that once. They're like, oh man, Adam, he's a creative hustler. He will get it done. He's the guy. And then I just coined that phrase and I put it in and people are like, you put hustler in your thing? I'm like, it gets people talking. People are like, oh, you call yourself a creative hustler, eh? I'm like, yep, by hook or by crook, I'll get it done. I always deliver. I'm not going to be like, oh, I can't get it done. Like you see all those expressions you hear be like, excuses are for the ones who don't succeed. And you see all these things. And I'm not trying like, I'm a guy, man, I barely got through high school. I'm not like a classically trained, really, really highly educated degree. Like I'd rather stumble, fall, break my nose, which I've had done 6 times, break my jaw, which I've had to, and get through it and figure out a way than to go to my family or to people and say, I failed, I can't do it. Whereas it's weird. When I was a kid and I played sports and they got hard, I quit right away. I can't do it. This sucks. I don't know what changed. I couldn't think of a defining moment when that switched. In my head, maybe is when I had like my daughter and I didn't want to fail and I borrowed all this money and my dad had trusted me and it seemed like the world would end if I didn't pay him back. Although it wouldn't, but in my head it did. And a little thing my stepdad taught me that I use every week. Now there's still every week there's calls I don't want to do. There's emails I don't want to do. There's things that are always much harder. And we put that resistance on the situation more than it usually is. And my dad told me, he's like, Adam, if you want to be successful, my stepfather was really, really successful. He was the president of Cameron Oil Industries. He's the one that financed the union and still even interim finances my pre-sales of my films now. He goes, Adam, what I used to do is if that something was really bugging me all weekend, a weight on my shoulder, some resistance, a call I was scared to do, a report I was scared to tackle, a bureaucratic document I didn't want to challenge myself to do, I would go into my office and I'd tackle that first thing. Because once that's done, then the rest of the week's like, oh, I can pick Andre Giant over my head now. I'm ready, right? And I can say this after my dad said this, or if it's a call you're dreading, or whatever it is you don't want to deal with. Like sometimes we deal with talent, we deal with agents again, like whatever. Pick up that phone. 98% of the time, it's not nearly as bad as what you perceive it's going to be in your head. And even when another call comes up, I got one this week, or I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do that one. And then I'm like, Adam, do the thing, get it done, get it out of the way, go over it. And dude, I did like 3 last week, and each one I'm like, this was so much easier than I was putting it in my head. It was a cakewalk. Like it was fun. It was almost like hug through the phone. I'm like, why was I dreading that so bad? But knock that out. And then it feels like, then all of a sudden you're like, man, I've never been on a 5K run, but I think I'm going to go do that next. I think I'm ready. Right? Like you just feel
it's that momentum.
You feel like you can. And I tell my daughter this, and I tell my son, I'm always like, man, get those out of the way. That's what I used to do a lot when I was younger. I'd procrastinate like crazy, and I put it off and I put it off and I put it off to the last minute till things were horrible. And then, I got over that, and then, found like from this advice from my dad being like, tackle it first, get it out of the way. And it's not as bad as the resistance you put on it will be preventing you from succeeding far more than the situation itself.
Yeah. There's a thing that happens there's a thing you need to do, but you don't want to do it. And so you're like, I won't do it today. And then that weight stacks for the next day. And you have shame and guilt that basically multiply that effort. And then you're basically training yourself because now you got this, a week's worth of shame of guilt of not knowing to do the thing. And then it becomes too much. And then you're training yourself, oh, I'm just going to avoid that. And instead of processing emotion where you sit with your emotion and you just marinate with it and you desensitize to it, you compound it. And so that's an amazing, if you could, wave a magic wand to a young documentary maker and give them one skill set, would it be to be able to say, hey, big thing first, wave a wand, just do it, and just
it would be that the two things specifically like that I think can work at anything in life. Tackle what you're and there's a great book. It's one of the few I've read. I don't read a lot of books. I should read a lot more. Sure. I read research on my docs, but I don't read books. The War of Art talks resistance, right? And then how you will make, and you just said it perfectly there. Like your dream is there. Your dream, whatever it is, you want to be a professional podcaster, you want to make films, you want to be an athlete. You will literally put everything in front of that. You're like, okay, well, I'll get my proposal done for my film right after I do the dishes and I clean the house. And like, when do you ever want to do the dishes and clean the house? You normally put those
never.
off for months. But now when the thing that could change your life or to that next step, you're putting all these things in front of it. Right. And that is, I remember reading that in the book, and they say resistance can be in many forms. Some people call it the devil. Some people call it, laziness or procrastination. It can be whatever you manifest it, but resistance will always be there. Just the best, like athletes find a way. That I was reading recently, especially with COVID, how the biggest struggle with competitive athletes right now is how to make things interesting, because redundancy and repetitiveness of great athletes, they have to practice stuff all the time. Like my daughter plays competitive hockey and it's hundreds of shots every day, stick handling. That's boring, right? Yeah. Like how fun can you make just shooting all day or stick handling or dribbling over and over and over again? But you have to find a way, right? You have to find a way to overcome that resistance and do it. And that's what I found. Like, I still work on it. I'm not just saying I got it figured out. Like there's still days when I'm like, ooh, I don't want to do that call. It's going to suck. Like, like even times like, look, I just worked with Michael Bisbing, who's now become my homie. He's a great guy.
Oh, that's cool.
But there's at times of the doc where he was really mad about how things were going. He's like, you need to call me. And like, you're calling a world champion, right? And you're like, oh, I don't really like it when he's mad. I got to call him. I get it. Right. And like, You know, and dude, but now again, I would go and 90% of the time, like, dude, Bisping's a wicked guy. He's super witty and charismatic and funny and huge heart and caring. And you get on with him and you'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe I was dreading gonna talk to him so much. Like he almost made me cry and I want to hug him and his wife through the phone. Like,
oh yeah.
You have to. Oh, his family is amazing. Like, if you were not a Bisping fan before his documentary, you 100% will be afterwards, because there's a Rocky move. There's the Rocky movies, which we all grew up on. If you're my age, that's like every boy, I think, was in front of the TV pretending get rock and doing the punches. Bisping is the real life Rocky, only he over even more than Rocky. The injuries he had to overcome, the reveals in the film, the guys that were all testing positive for steroids that he fought, his story is incredible. Incredible.
That right there makes me want to go watch it. Just that connection. Bisping is a real life Rocky. I mean, and that's the thing. It's so funny because, you know, again, this whole podcast is about heroes of reality. It's understanding people's journeys that they go on, and no one. You're right. No one is. You know, they're not necessarily. You don't. Successful people are like, oh, they're smarter, they're better, they're a super alien like Elon Musk. That's not true. It's just they went on the path and they found a way not to quit, which is what you're referencing here. One thing I'd like to talk about, because documentaries, anything you do, it's going to be a grind. You can find the greatest things in the world. It becomes a grind. How do you choose documentaries? How did you the Union was something that you chose because you had this, you were surrounded by this, what tools I have at my disposal. There's a story here. Now that that's out of the way, and you have more options, how do you choose these things? Because you know it's a grind, you know what you're into.
So now looking at like, you know, when I'm trying now to go on the path of least resistance and a lot of things. So things I look at first is who is because we're doing a lot of bio docs and sport docs, and I love those because they're a great journey and a great, you know, ESPN 30 for 30 really showed people that you don't have to have any interest in the sport. If it's a great hero's journey, you're going to connect with it, regardless if it's in bodybuilding or basketball or hockey or fencing, right? If it's a cool story. So then once you kind of find something that I know is marketable, when it has a big built-in social media following or a niche following or something that I know I can take to market and get pre-sold, get our financing in place, then it's like, do they have that story outside of the sport that the average person can connect to, right? And then, you know, the third thing is meeting them, and what are they like? Because, you know, we've had some talent that's really difficult to work with, and then other talent that are awesome. So at this point in my career, because I'm 40, and I'm kind of like, man, I want all the three. I want a really compelling story. I want them to be really awesome to work with, and I want it to be commercially successful, so that, you know, I don't want to go through remortgaging my house and being so broke that I don't know if it's like I'm done doing those, right? That's, I think, you do at the beginning of your career. Now I do the safe, like, commercial bet, but it's really meeting the talent, seeing if they have a story outside of it. Like, you know, we're in talks with Dolph Lundgren and Dane Cook and Danny Trejo, obviously, and like Bisping's is releasing. They're all like, do they have a story that the regular person can connect to outside of whatever sports or celebrity status they've got, that people will be like, wow, that's interesting. And I getting to be like, if I'm interested now, like if I'm in years of my life I want to be interested in your story. If I'm not, thankfully I'm in a position that it's not just about the money. I'm not going to do it, right? Like if you don't have something that I really find compelling and am inspired by, I'm not going to do it, right? So
which is a wonderful way to think about it. And I mean, looking at the lessons learned, I mean, the Union was something that was a compelling story, and it could have been a market success, but it was one of those, you know, blackball, it's passed around the internet, get you famous. You created value in other ways, in terms of name recognition and stuff like that. But I love it. I mean, simply put, if young documentary film creators or anybody in this space is like, is there a compelling story? Do I like the people? And is there a market niche that I can pre-sell this to prove that there's its viability? That seems like a very healthy, because if you remove,
don't forget the passion. You have to be passionate about it. You hit all the, but if you're, because the passion will help you get through the dark moments or the challenge moments, right? If you're not passionate about it, you'll put it on that back burner, like we talked about. The resistance might overtake you, right? So it's good to have that passion to help you through those moments.
That's beautiful. And it's a fantastic like fact check. Okay, I'm interested. This is a compelling story. I like these people and there's market success opportunity. And then putting that together. Would that be kind of, if you're talking about putting together a pitch deck for a young person who's like, I want to make this thing about, I don't know, goldfish or an insert thing. Would they put together a pitch deck with it? Would it include like those types of elements in there? Like and just
so
yeah.
what we usually do with pitch decks for ducks is lots of visuals, cool quotes
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that, because ultimately when you're meeting with a distributor or broadcaster, they're not going to read everything while you meet them. Then they're going to say, hey, send this to me digitally, and then they'll read it, right? So you want the opening image to be beautiful. You want the opening, then your opening page with a powerful quote and cool stylized photos and the color schemes and the styles that you want to kind of make the film feel like, because you're trying to sell it to business people, not creatives, right? So they need to get feel and tone. And just like anything else in life, like I always tell people, they'll come with these like pitch books that they put together in a weekend, and I'm like, I can tell you rush this. I'm like, think about it. If this is your passion project and this is something you really want to do, why would you rush it, right? If you're going to go try to raise millions of dollars, would you rush it and just put it together quickly, or would you really put together the time to do it, right? Those are elements you need to do. I tell people, don't rush it, because this is your pitch. This might be your only chance to get to Netflix, and they better be so impressed with your pitch material that they want to buy it on the spot. Because if it looks like you just put it together on the weekend, they'll be able to tell, and they'll throw it out the door too.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Right, so my boy coming back from kickboxing now.
Oh, okay, okay.
I don't catch today. Sorry, my boys are. So yeah, you see my munchkins here in the back now.
Everybody, yeah, I know you got. That's epic. I know you got to run. You. Thank you so much. I see everyone's coming together here. I wanted to get a chance, and we'll wrap this up here. But because I want to talk a little bit about the inmate, but I know you're taking off right now. It's very powerful. I love these stories of the human story that you tell and the way that you put them together in this format. But I know we're coming to the end. You've been great with your time. Is there anything else you'd like to let us know about before you let people know about how they can get a hold of you and find more about what you do? Much like the Inmate #1 that just came out, that was awesome. Oh, it came out last year, but it's I would love to. Any last words you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, people can check out Danny Trejo's story. It's incredible. He should have been executed in Soledad prison in 1968, around to be one of the most successful Mexican American actors in Hollywood history, and does so much outside of acting. Inmate #1, The Rise of Danny Trejo, is available on almost all platforms except streaming, still on order because it's the universal release. And then Bisping, the Michael Bisping story, will be coming out this fall. If you're in Canada, it's available on Super exclusively right now. And then we have Breaking Olympia about Phil Heath, the bodybuilder, which we partnered with $7 per Rocks company, which will be coming out probably early next year, which that in itself was pretty cool, right? To be able to partner with, like when they did the big press release and people were like, dude, you partnered with him? And I was like, I know, right? Like pinch myself moment. I'm still this Canadian.
Yeah.
And then if you want to reach out to me, as you saw, Dylan, I'm pretty approachable. I'm on Instagram. It's just Scorgie. Like I always put it how it sounds, right? Score like a goal with a G. And then on Twitter, I'm Adam Scorgie. Facebook, I might be maxed out, but you can message me on there. I've been an old school dog on Facebook. I was on there since like 2006 when like nobody was really using it. So it's still kind of my go-to. Reach out, and I'm always trying to get back to filmmakers and give them pointers and help where I can. I believe in paying it forward, and I've had it pay back several times where I've helped people on their projects asking for nothing, and then they've gotten financed on things down the road and brought me in as a consultant. So I'm happy. I am busy, as you saw. Like even now, I'm multitasking with kids and stuff on the go. It's what I do, but I am pretty good at getting back. Dylan, as you know, you reached out and I got back, and we set up a time. And thank you. I really mean it. Thank you for having me on. There's lots of people you can reach out to nowadays. I love doing podcasts. It's almost like therapeutic for me to kind of go through this and rehash memories of how it all went through, and help me to kind of appreciate what I've accomplished. We get so caught up in what's next and how to get further and how to keep crushing goals that it's nice to do these podcasts and for me to kind of reflect on what we've already accomplished. If me and my team don't do anything more from here, should be pretty happy with ourselves. Although I do plan to do lots more.
Absolutely, brother. No, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I just love to watch you in your craft and find your work and be on your mission and being able to share these stories and find these stories and inspire other people along these paths as well, whether they're in bodybuilding or hockey or they're a Mexican immigrant that want to be film stars. There's so many different stories that can inspire the next generation to be better. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the hustle and the grind and all that you do, brother. And have a beautiful rest of the day with your fam. And I'll see you soon in the digital landscape. So have a beautiful, blessed day. I'll see you soon, Adam.
Thanks, you too. We should do this again.
100%, brother. Have a beautiful day. I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening.